podcast, and today what I thought I'd be looking at is, does social media work? So what I want to do in this podcast is look at the different social media channels you can use, obviously looking at B2B and B2C as well, and then actually seeing what your kind of approach should be. This is going to be a precursor to actually taking each social media platform apart and actually going into some real in-depth and giving you some real knowledge. But today is just to give you an overview and give you my thoughts. Okay, so does social media work? For me, yes it does, but the only way that it works is you need to be consistent. So let's look at the key channels that you would be looking at. So you've got Facebook, you've got Twitter, you've got LinkedIn, you've got Instagram. Some of you may look at using Snapchat, you've got Pinterest. So those to me probably are some of the key ones, and you can also put into that mix, you can put in YouTube as well, although some would argue it's not a social media channel, but it can be used. So for me, those are some of the key ones, and the only way that you can make socials work is to actually be consistent in your posting, but also be consistent in your posting across each channel. So one of the things that I really advise is you need to now have a omni-channel approach, because the way that people work is they will use social media as their source of information. Particularly in a B2B setting, lots of people now will use LinkedIn as their social media setting, and they will look at LinkedIn and they will use LinkedIn for information within a sector, look for general information, look for some education in there as well, but they will be using LinkedIn as their sole main source of information. So you need to be able to work alongside this, and you need to go, okay, so what's my strategy for that? But other people will be using Facebook as their main source of information. Others will be using Twitter as well. So if you look at those different channels, they have different advantages and also disadvantages as well. So if we look at Facebook, Facebook now there's still a preconception with Facebook that Facebook is for the youngsters. And if you look at the recent figures, that the average age of a Facebook user now is just tipping 50 years old. So when you look at that, that might just help you reframe your thoughts on using Facebook as a social media channel for your business. In a B2B setting, you should be using Facebook, but you should be using it very much as your business page. So you should have a business page on Facebook and use it on that way. You can use your own Facebook profile for yourself to build you as a brand, and you can do that as well. But it's also just making sure you know why you're using it and how you're using it. If you look back at Facebook, say 5 years ago, you could really push hard as using your personal profile on Facebook. You could get lots of likes. It really was a little bit Wild West 5 years ago. Now it's a lot more streamlined, and that's really because Facebook wants you to do advertising with them. They want you to spend money with them to actually be able to either sell your products, sell your goods or your services, or to be able to target people really well. And Facebook advertising, you can target people. That's one of the huge benefits of Facebook, is you can target people, target them by their age, where they live, all the various different demographics that are there, but you can also target them on their interests as well. And that's where, in my mind, Facebook really comes into its own, is Facebook advertising and being able to get your ad in front of somebody in a really quick, simple and easy way. If you look at Twitter, I mean, Twitter for me, from a B2B perspective, I think is a really good, quick and easy product to be able to use. But again, when you're putting your message out there, your message on Twitter is going to be very different to your message on Facebook. And equally, it's going to be very different to your message on other socials as well. But Twitter for me, for building an audience and getting your message out there and getting your name out there, is very quick and easy. So you can set your account up, you can get on, you can start following people, and then hopefully they'll start to follow you back. But with Twitter, you need to be putting out some really good content, some eye-catching content, and you again need to be consistent. And when I talk about consistency, it's just making sure that you do the same kind of post on the same kind of times. So it's about being consistent. So you can't say, well, I'm going to post 3 times this week and once the next week. You've got to try and be consistent. Now, I would say that when you're looking at Twitter, you just need to be consistent with it. But you probably just need to vary a little bit the times when you are doing it, because you're really battling for space on a feed as you're coming through, which, yes, you are doing on Facebook to a point, but there's a lot more competition, I believe, on a Twitter frame coming through. So now let's look at LinkedIn within your socials as well. So LinkedIn is ideal both for B2B and for B2C. Now, if you look at LinkedIn, LinkedIn is the only B2B networking social media channel that there is. All of the other socials, they're very much about B2C and about individuals, but they are competing against each other. But for me, LinkedIn, should you be using LinkedIn? Absolutely. You be having a personal profile on LinkedIn? Absolutely. And should you have a business page? You definitely should have a business page. And the reason that you need to be using this channel for both B2B and for B2C is showing some credibility for yourself, showing some credibility for your brand, but also being strategic on finding people. Now, you can find people and you can join people and you can message people and you can do a whole load of connecting on LinkedIn, but also just think about what your strategy is going to be. If you're B2C, then everybody on LinkedIn is a potential customer. And it's the same as it is on B2B. But within your B2C, you might actually have a better choice of people than you are in a B2B single sector. So think about how you would use LinkedIn. But LinkedIn, in terms of your posting, is going to be completely different to Facebook and completely different to Twitter. But that's only if you know your audience. It amazes me how many people put the same post out on different channels, but it's the same post. It's not even got a slight little tweak to it. You can get away with brief posts across all channels for some consistency and just some regular generic posting. But if you want to be really on your topic and really want to be seen as the expert, then you need to be able to do the mix. Now, the challenge with that and the challenge with any of the social media channels is time. So they may be free options for you to promote and advertise your business. But what you need to invest time. And everyone's time is precious in terms of that. So if you are going to do socials, and even I'm as guilty as anyone else, you need to make sure you are able to commit the time to be able to do it. Now, if you look at it from that front, there is nothing wrong with using some scheduling tools. So a lot of people will use Hootsuite, and you can schedule when you want your post to go up. So in terms of that, that is a way of helping with time, that you can schedule your post to go up at a certain time, and you can actually schedule them across channels. So for me, automation is good to do, but again, it's putting the time and effort into writing your posts and having really good images. So they do say a picture paints 1,000 words, and on social media that is so true. And so be that a picture or be that a video, you need to strongly look at that. One of the guests we had on the podcast in recent weeks was Gail Acaster, and she uses video on a Monday morning to do her Monday morning motivation, which is fantastic and gets thousands of views on that. And that's a really good way of using it. But it's also inputting time. I know when I spoke to Gail offline, she puts a lot of time and effort into her posts and actually committed to a long time before she actually got any traction. And when we talk about a long time, you're talking 2 to 3 months. But then you do start to get the traction. And then as you get more traction, you get more followers. And then you start to see business coming in as well. But it is a long-term strategy. And I do say to people, when you're using socials, you need to commit to it. You need to be consistent. And you actually need to do it for the long term as well. But I would also be saying that if you're looking at Instagram, and Instagram now is for a slightly different sector. It's one that's very, very visual. It's probably one that's used in B2C more than B2B. And I say that because it's all about the visual bit. And B2C, you can be more visual, and it probably does have more visual. Some would argue that B2B is the same, and it is to a point, but for some industries, it just doesn't work in terms of Instagram. So you do need to think about what works. If somebody said to me, okay, so what are the socials I really need to have? I'd be saying you need to have Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I would say you need to have those. Those should be your 3 prime. And then on top of that, if you've got the content and you have the time, is to then add in Instagram. And you can add in Pinterest as well for links for Pinterest. But Pinterest to me is very much a B2C social. The odd B2B may go in there if you're doing supplies and things. But to me, predominantly it's going to be a B2C. And then obviously YouTube, and YouTube is a whole subject on its own. So from today, go away, look at your socials. Are you being consistent? Are you being able to automate any of it? Can you think about your target market and how you would use those. So those are really important things to go and think about, but definitely make sure you're consistent on your socials, you're out there and you're doing something with your socials, but also do look at your time, your input, and also the return you get on those as well. So sometimes just having a drip feed can be fine. Sometimes you can really crank it up, but you're going to put a lot of time and effort in. You need to be really clear on what your results on the back. But most of all, you do need to have a presence on socials, and you do need to have a strategy about growing your audience. But if you're consistent, the one thing people will do is they will always Google you. And when they Google you, they'll look at your website potentially, and they may actually go onto your website. They'll also look on your Facebook, they'll look on your Twitter, they'll look on your LinkedIn, and they'll expect to see something on there. So again, if you're going to enter into socials, you need to make sure you're there for the long term and you do have a strategy. So really hope you enjoyed this one today. I'm going to go in depth a little bit more in the coming weeks as well. We're going to really look at Facebook ads and how to get the best out of that for B2B and to B2C. So really hope you're enjoying that. Got some great guests coming up as well. And as I mentioned last week, really looking forward to some launch details of our new Business Owners podcast. Got a great presenter who's going to be co-presenting with me. We're really excited, and we will be giving you some more information in the coming weeks on that one. So have a great week and listen in next week.